Guys, I finally figured it out. I finally know why Ian Fleming Publications decided to censor the James Bond books. And if I'm right, it means they're not likely to reverse that decision anytime soon. However, if you listen to my perspective on things, you might start to understand why. So if you've got a couple of minutes, if you sound vaguely interested, stay tuned and we'll talk all about it. Hi guys, it's me, and I haven't made a video in a hot minute, and I especially haven't made one about James Bond books in a while, which is kind of sad because that used to be my shtick, was the James Bond book guy. I loved it, and I remember like a couple of years ago how excited I was to be part of the conversation, especially when like Kim Sherwood's new book came out. It was cool. I got like an advanced reading copy, and I got to interview her, and I got to chat to David Lowbridge Ellis about it, and it was cool to be part of the whole conversation. And I was so stoked when Ian Fleming Publications announced that they regained the rights to Ian Fleming's books and they were heading out on their own as independent publishers. Because you know me, I am a self-published author. I've been very successful. I've sold over 69,000 copies of my books. I've made over $300,000 from self-publishing. And I was like, this is it. This is where independent publishing finally comes of age. James Bond, once again, is leading the charge. And then we heard something that really knocked the wind out of my sails. And that was the fact that Ian Fleming Publications had decided to censor the original James Bond books. And I was disgusted, and that's because I mean, I don't think I need to explain why I was disgusted about that. It's like, you know, I'm a book guy. My family's been in publishing and writing for 4 generations. I have a degree in history and English literature, well, Victorian studies, which is books from the Victorian period, specifically in the context of English literature. So, you know, retaining the original words of a book is something that is a fundamental value of mine. And I was so disappointed when the estate of Ian Fleming decided to edit Ian Fleming's words. I was disgusted when they were like, we think Ian Fleming would have approved. No, he would never have approved. I mean, this is the man who went to Moscow to talk about the British engineers who were on trial and, you know, spoke truth to power. This is a man who wrote books that, you know, people derided at the time, but were startling in their authenticity. You look at The Spy Who Loved Me and Vivian's story, and, you know, how she'd had an abortion and things like that. Back when those books were published, this was shocking and scandalous, and yet Ian Fleming wrote honestly about experiences women of that period would have gone through, and yet still made his character somebody he could relate to and who James Bond found desirable. It's like Ian Fleming was a teller of truth, even though he was a spy, and therefore it really has left a sour taste in my mouth, the whole idea of his books being censored. That being said, I was in BJ's Wholesale Club the other day, which to British people you might not know, but you have these Costco and Sam's Club and BJ's Wholesale Club where you pay a membership and you get to go and buy like bulk packets of things. So my parents remember a place called Macro in the UK, which he did that. Anyway, I'm going through this place which has huge box. You know, you don't just buy laundry detergent, you buy like 4 gallons of laundry detergent. You don't just buy like a 6-pack of hamburger buns, you buy like 24 hamburger buns. And it was interesting going through and seeing the stuff they had for sale, and I saw a bunch of books that I was familiar with because, as I said, I have a degree in Victorian studies, which is English literature specifically of the Victorian period. And I was wandering through and they had a book section. They normally have like mass market paperbacks that you can buy super cheap. James Patterson, Lee Child, Frida McFadden, stuff like that. And they had a bunch of Jules Verne books. Jules Verne. Yeah, he was French, but he was one of the defining early authors of science fiction. You'll know him from 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. Brilliant author. Loved him, and I've always been a fan of his. I share a birthday with Jules Verne, actually, but it was around 2000 when his books were originally written in French, and they did a new translation of the books, at around the year 2000 or something, and they were spectacular. They were like, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea had been an incredibly popular book in the English literature market, so much so that it inspired like Disney to make a movie about 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. But the English translations were very bad. And then in around 2000, they had new translations that added like 25% length, and it was incredible. I read 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea for the first time of this new translation, and it was amazing. And one of the other books I read based on these new translations was this book, 5 Weeks in a Balloon. And when I was walking through BJ's, that's the book I saw. 5 Weeks in a Balloon by Jules Verne. And they had a nice little hardback edition with a kind of like, I don't know, it was kind of like clip art, steampunky stuff on the cover. I was like, that's interesting. That's interesting. I'm wandering through like a wholesale supermarket and they have a bunch of books and they have Jules Verne, 5 Weeks in a Balloon. I was interested because it's a terrific book. It's a terrific adventure story about a bunch of British explorers who get a hot air balloon and travel across Africa. And Jules Verne was a science fiction author, so he knew how ballooning at that particular point in time, towards the end of the 1900s, was, exploding, not literally in development and stuff, and it would lead on to like the development of zeppelins and things like that. And he created this wonderful science fiction book in which these explorers had this wonderful hot air balloon that didn't lose hot air. It like used two pockets and electricity to like heat the air and then sink the air and stuff. And this meant that these three brave explorers could go from one side of Africa to the other side of Africa in 5 weeks in a balloon and see everything. It was a wonderful adventure story. But I was surprised to see it for sale in BJ's Wholesale Club, because there was one scene in 5 Weeks in a Balloon that I remember reading as a teenager or in my early 20s and being like, what? And this is a scene in which our brave British explorers floating across Africa in their balloon. If you wonder what the scrabbling's going on, my dog is... What are you doing, dog? Don't know. Anyway, okay. Hot air balloon going across Africa. For some reason, I think that it's sinking down and near a bunch of trees, and then our brave British explorers become under attack by African natives. And the African natives are crawling up the tree and trying to drag the balloon out of the sky. And our brave, plucky British heroes have to get their rifles and shoot them. And I mean, just from the way I described it there, I think to a 21st century audience, that sounds pretty horrific. These three white British explorers shooting a bunch of natives for trying to claw their balloon out of the sky. But it gets so much worse. It gets so much worse because they weren't African natives at all. They were baboons. Yeah, you know those monkeys with the big butts? Yep. Our plucky British heroes had been confused and had thought that the baboons were African natives. And that already sounds so much worse, but it gets so much worse. Because once they had had their jovial laugh, ha ha ha, look at us, we thought these were African natives, they just turned out to be a bunch of monkeys. And in the French, one of the guys in the balloon is like, de loin, la différence n'est pas grande, mon cher Samuel, which means from afar, the difference between baboons and African natives isn't that big, my dear Samuel. And then Joe, who's one of the plucky sidekick of the story, goes, ni même de près, which means up close as well. So basically he's saying that even up close, baboons and Africans are practically indistinguishable. And yeah, I read this book 25 years ago, and I was like, oh my God, that's really racist and offensive. And it's certainly not going to be any less racist and offensive these days. So it's a wonderful book by a wonderful author, but that particular section is, as you would say it these days, problematic. Absolutely problematic. And that's why I was surprised to see this book for sale in BJ's Wholesale Club, where basically some people in the shopping department are like, where can we get hold of a bunch of cheap shit and sell it for a slight profit? And somehow they grabbed hold of all these hundreds of copies or thousands of copies, 5 Weeks in a Balloon, and decided to sell them for like $9. And I picked up the book and I started flicking through it, and I realized that, somebody had decided to censor that particular passage. They'd like removed that passage from the book. And I was sitting there and I was like, kind of upset because I'm kind of like, I don't like people censoring books. And I was kind of upset because I'm like, I've had so many discussions with people about 5 Weeks in a Balloon, specifically because it had this massively racist passage in it. This is why the book still has like relevance 100, 120 years after it was published. But at the same time, I was like, you know what? Just imagine in this day and age, with the crap we have to deal with, if BJ's were selling 5 Weeks in a Balloon with that scene in it. And somebody had gone into BJ's wholesale club and was like, "Oh, look, little Timmy, it's a book by Jules Verne. You remember 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea? It's a Disney movie. Let's buy it and give it to you." And he read that book, and little Timmy was like, "Mum, Mum, they confused the Africans with baboons and they started shooting them." And yeah, there would be, if I'm honest, there would be an entirely justifiable outrage. In the newspapers, they'd be like, BJ's is selling super racist books. And I can argue from my, uh, ivory pillar that historical context is important, and this book was written at a time when, values are very different. It's like nobody cares, especially not in a news headline. Can you imagine what news bait that would be? Like this major national chain of wholesale retailers is selling a book that has this passage in it that is super super racist, and there's no way you can like explain that scene without it sounding racist, because let's be honest, it's kind of racist. Back in the late Victorian period, British people and French people did literally think that Africans were monkeys, and fortunately things have changed. And 5 Weeks in a Balloon as a book has an awful lot of merit to it, but that scene is, as I said earlier, problematic. And I can respect the fact that it's problematic. And I can also respect the fact that whoever decided to publish all of these hundreds, thousands of copies of the hardback edition of the new translation of 5 Weeks in a Balloon were probably like, maybe we should skip that scene, specifically for the fact that if they then sell it in bulk to BJ's Wholesale Club, they're not going to have this horrible news story of, oh my god, BJ's Wholesale Club is selling this super racist book. And I thought about this, and all the pieces clicked in my brain together, and I was like, I'm starting to get it. I'm starting to get it now. I can understand why Ian Fleming Publications decided to censor the James Bond books. And that's because, let's be honest, the James Bond books are 70 years old. They have been through a ridiculous number of reprints. I mean, everybody up to this point who wanted to read the original James Bond books has had multiple opportunities with which to do so. And now Ian Fleming Publications has this intellectual property that is not going to be making the bestseller list anytime soon. All the people who wanted to buy the James Bond books have already bought the James Bond books, and now they have to introduce them to a new audience. And one way in which they can do that is by producing mass market paperbacks with these sexy new covers, and then sending them off to WH Smith's or I don't know, Iceland, Sainsbury's, Tesco, whoever has mass market paperbacks in an aisle somewhere in their supermarket where people can go through, and then someone's like, "Look, Dad, it's a James Bond book," and Dad can pick it up for £9 or whatever, and then read it. And I can understand that there is a very very good business model for wanting to do that. You can produce cheap paperbacks, put them in supermarkets, and people will buy them. However, Sainsbury's and Tesco's and all the other shops might stock these mass market paperbacks of the Ian Fleming books, probably don't want to do so if it has the N word in it. And I can kind of get that because, I stand here once again in my ivory tower, being able to talk about like historical context and stuff like that. But if I was a sketchy tabloid reporter and I wanted to grab some headlines, I'd be like, "Look at this, Tesco's is selling a paperback with the N word in it." And then James Bond has a completely unfair reputation already as being like sexist, misogynist, and things like that. So just imagine God, imagine the field day people would have if the James Bond books were released uncensored to the masses in places where you could pick them up for a few quid. All you'd need is just one bad faith actor to be like, look, Sainsbury's is selling a book with the N word in it. And then it's like, okay, you're screwed. And then Sainsbury's looks bad, and the estate of Ian Fleming looks bad, and nobody really looks past headlines. All you need is to see like Sainsbury's selling book with the N word in it, or the James Bond books have the N word in it, and suddenly a nice little earner that you got going on in the background on the back burner becomes this big hot topic issue. And I was like, you know what, that makes sense. That actually makes sense. I can get it now. I actually genuinely understand why, if they want to make any money from the original James Bond books, the only way they can do so is by selling mass market paperbacks of them. And if you do that, you have to make sure that you're not giving some tabloid hack ammunition to then come after you for headline inches. And so they censor them. And, you know, what can you do about it? And I can't support it. I really don't support the censorship of books by an author who was a journalist, who was known for truth telling after his death. But I've also worked in corporate America and publishing and stuff like that, so I can kind of get it. Like I do work for a law firm right now. I used to work for the legal department of $1 billion company. Um, I'm aware of how litigation averse companies and corporations and businesses are. I think I can understand a couple of people at Ian Fleming Publications having a conversation, being like, we could nip this in the bud and make sure it's not a problem, or we could just whistle past the graveyard and put out a book with some stuff that at some point some tedious wanker is going to get butthurt about and decide to make a big issue. And then what the internet is like these days. You know how nobody cares about context. It could explode into something big and ugly. So there we go. And I think that means, to a certain extent, I've stopped blaming Ian Fleming Publications. I think I can understand now that it's not really a case of Ian Fleming Publications wanting to do this. I like to think they don't want to do this, but I can see now that they're. I can see now that they're basically like being risk averse. And I don't know, it's unfortunate, and I wish they didn't do it. I wish they had moral courage. But I can also totally appreciate that. I mean, Ian Fleming Publications has this wonderful opportunity to really define what independent publishing is for the next century, because they have the most powerful literary property behind them, except next to like Harry Potter or something like that. And they also have the burden of that responsibility. It's like Ian Fleming Publications going independent. They don't want to be the ones that kill James Bond as a literary franchise. They want to be able to create new books. They published on His Majesty's Secret Service, which was brilliant. They're supporting Kim Sherwood, creating a whole new like James Bond universe, which is brilliant to be able to do that. They're bringing Raymond Benson, a fantastic author, master craftsman, back into relevance by republishing his books. They are doing an awful lot of good work. And so I'll say, maybe, just maybe, I should show a little empathy for them and get off my high horse and think, okay, I don't know, I can understand where they're coming from. I still don't necessarily support it. I don't think it's the right thing for them to have done. I think if with the hardback editions coming out, if they really, really wanted to make a difference, they could say, we'll do the hardback editions, but we'll publish the original books. I think that would mean so much to people, but I understand why they might not want to do that. And I think to a certain extent, it's cowardly not to do that. I think to a certain extent, it's against the values that Ian Fleming represents. But at the same time, you know, they have the life and legacy of Ian Fleming to safeguard. And right now, we live in a very, very weird time in human history in which, you know, literary giants are brought to their knees by tiny, inconsequential details. So, you know, they're keeping their cards close to their chest. They're trying to do the right thing. And they're trying to move forward by republishing books, by getting new books written. I don't know, maybe cut them some slack. So, with that realization, I've definitely mellowed about Ian Fleming publications and their decision to do this. I do just wish that they would take a moment to address the whole issue, because it's very clear that a lot of people feel the same way that I do, that censoring the books for Ian Fleming is kind of a betrayal, and it's kind of the antithesis of the values that Ian Fleming represented. And I think that they can maintain their position, but in order to win people like me, and not just me, I'm just one person, but I represent thousands of James Bond fans who are massively upset by their decisions to censor the books. If they want to win us back, they should at least give us the decency of having an honest conversation about it, like making some kind of statement or doing something in which they say, hey, yeah, we understand that you guys are upset about this. There are reasons we did this, and there are reasons we did this beyond just the fact that we're trying to be politically correct. And I think if they explained those reasons to us in with more transparency, and like explained like the commercial reasons that I just outlined, if they could tell us that, I think it would go a long way to solving this massive disconnect at the moment that they have between James Bond fans and the stuff that they're producing. Because it's very clear whenever Ian Fleming publications post anything on Instagram or anything on Twitter or whatever, all you have are comments going on about these books being censored. And it's like, you need to deal with that. You need to actually address that as an issue, because it's insulting for people like me who have been James Bond fans our entire lives and are like are passionate about these books, about the author of these books and what he contributed to literature. You know, the moment you've alienated all of us and we feel like you don't give a shit about us, and just having a conversation, opening it up to have a conversation and be real about it would be the first and most important step to actually solving the problem. And I think it's a question. I think it's honestly a situation in which, at the end of the day, people like me could be talked into accepting the fact that these books were censored if we were given the respect of a conversation about it and saw that us supporting what Ian Fleming does could be valuable. I think that's it. I think that's it. I mean, you know, I used to make so many videos about Ian Fleming's books, so many videos about the James Bond books, and I've just stopped because I feel completely disillusioned and like disenfranchised and just like not that Ian Fleming Publications doesn't give a shit about me. It's that they actually have active contempt for me. That's how I feel about this. And it's like if they manage to just take one step closer to actually having an open conversation about what's going on and why they made this decision, I think at that point, a lot of good things could happen. I think they could bring a lot of people who really, really have just felt rejected by what they're doing back into the fold, and we could move forward in a positive way. But that's just me. And to be honest, I don't know whether that's ever going to happen. Um, yeah, I don't think Ian Fleming Publications has any idea who the hell I am. I'm just some weird guy on the internet who makes videos about that stuff. But if they did, then at the moment I kind of feel like they have contempt for me, and I don't feel like my position is a contemptible one. I think that wanting to preserve the literary integrity of a deceased author is a worthy cause, and you can't just dismiss my opinions or the opinions of all the thousands of other James Bond fans who feel really betrayed by that decision. But it's New Year, and new opportunities await, and I don't know, maybe there will be some sort of simpatico resolution to this in the future. But I meant to make like a 5-minute video about this. It's been a 25-minute video. If you've got this far, thank you so much. I appreciate it. I really do. Maybe you're using this to help you fall asleep at night. I don't know. But I appreciate you listening to me rant. And I'll be back very soon with another video. I'll try and make it shorter. Ciao. I'm Roland Hume. I've sold 67,000 copies of my books. If you want to find out how I did it, I've got a link right here you can click. And otherwise, don't forget to subscribe. I've got more videos coming soon. Thank you.